So that's the kind of basic thing. And since given this occasion, I thought I'd talk a lot about the Selenium integration in Hudson. So let's see. So you can in most of the languages, the execution of Selenium tests are normally done from the language-specific test framework. So say if you are in Java, you'll be running those tests from JUnit or TestNG. And I'm sure if you're using different languages, then you'll be using some of those tools like Rake and PHP Unit to run the test. So for most of those test frameworks, the Hudson has the plugin support to collect the reports. So just like the one that I showed you earlier, you can see all the test execution reports in that way. So you can keep track of success and failure along that line. Now, one of the unique, I guess, challenges in case of Selenium is that the people often have additional gimmicks in their test harness that generates the screenshot or grab the server log files from Selenium RCs. Now, and then so naturally you kind of want to see that when you are actually looking at test failures in Hudson, you naturally want to see those reports, along the same page. Now, this is unfortunately a bit tricky to do because there is no well-established convention at the test framework level to associate these additional information to the test cases. So therefore, for the most of the test framework, this doesn't work right out of the box, which is something hopefully we can fix. There are some ideas in this space, so hopefully we get to work on those things soon. But in the meantime, what you can do is to use what we call as the artifact archivers, which is just a way of grabbing a bunch of files from your build directory and then store it inside Hudson. So you probably know the naming convention that associates the test reports with the log files and the screenshots and so on. So you can still go into Hudson and see those files. It's just that the navigation isn't as nice as it could be because Hudson doesn't know about those conventions. Right? But it can be still made to work. I guess another thing is if you have the Selenese test, then you can run the Selenium HQ plugin. It sort of gives you a little nicer UI binding for specifying parameters to the Selenium execution. So this is a screenshot from there. And then this will sort of capture the same report in a similar way that I showed you earlier, and then you can track the regressions or new failures and so on. Another interesting plugin, I think, is the support for the Selenium grid. So so one of the features in Hudson that I spent a lot of effort is to support distributed builds. So you can have a lot of machines in your farm, and then Hudson could utilize them to perform builds. And so, and often because you want to run tests in heterogeneous environment, that is, sometimes you need to run tests on Windows, in some other times you need to run on Mac and Linux, you tend to develop this cluster that has a lot of different nodes. So if you spend some time setting up those Hudson clusters, I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if you could actually deploy Selenium RCs on those nodes in your cluster? Because again, Selenium is another thing that want a heterogeneous cluster, right? Because part of the point of using Selenium is that you can test the browser, IE on Windows from Linux, Firefox on Linux to Safari on Mac. So there's an obvious natural fit here. So when you install the Selenium Grid plugin, what happens is that it will deploy the necessary Selenium Grid binaries on all Hudson slaves. And this happens all automatically without you installing any bits at all. And then when the Hudson actually starts processes on these machines to make it a part of the cluster, it will also start the relevant Selenium RCs on these nodes. It will then also start with the Selenium Grid hub on the Hudson master node. And in that way, and then it sets it configure the Selenium Grid in the right way that they sort of start talking to each other. So in this way, you have the whole Hudson cluster instantly overloaded with, or the overlaid with the Selenium RC farm, and you can use that from anywhere. So most typically, right, you'll be using those from the test running inside Hudson. That's where you do the most of the builds. So the build would happen in one of the Hudson slaves, and then that will talk to the Hudson master, which also runs the Selenium hub, and then that will coordinate the execution and start the browser at the right machines, and then those browsers should start sending requests to the web app that you're testing. But this can be also, by the way, this can be also used from outside the Hudson master. So let's say if one of the developers wants to run the test from his own laptop, but by using the browser that's in the Hudson slaves, then they can do so right away. So I think it's a pretty convincing plugin. Another thing that in here is the Hudson uses this concept called labels to choose the different slaves that run the browser. So normally, like let's say if you just say star Firefox, that's just telling that the Hudson has to pick some slave node to run the build, and because it doesn't really know which operating system you want it to be run on, it just picks one randomly. Now, this can be sometimes what you want, but sometimes this is not what you want. So there's a bit of extension that I put in the Selenium grid that allows you to specify the environment. So Hudson's labels is sort of, you can think of it as tags that you assign on slave nodes. So often they are sort of capability-based labels. So let's say you might have the label called Windows, which you assign to all the Windows nodes, or maybe you have a geographic-based tag here that the SFBay tag will be assigned to all the slaves that are in the San Francisco Bay Area. So if you have something like that, then you could actually specify that you want Firefox on one of the slaves that have the Windows label. So in this way, you can more you can control where the browser starts in more fine-grained level. You could also specify multiple labels. So let's say maybe you want to say Windows and 32-bit or Windows on the SFA region. And then so in that way, you could control things at various levels. Another nice feature in Hudson that works really well with the multiple browser testing, that is called the matrix project type. So often, again, if you have the Selenium test, you want to run the same set of tests, but against different browsers. So Hudson is a really good place to do that kind of thing. And we have a built-in support called matrix project. So the idea is that you make the configuration of the project once. So you specify where to check out the source code, what's the shell scripts that you're going to run to start the test process, and where the test reports are. And then you also tell Hudson that, by the way, I want to run those things in 3 different combinations here that I want to, and then you could specify that the one of them would be Firefox, another would be the Internet Explorer, or the another one would be Safari. And those different concrete values to be exposed as an environment variables to your build. So your build script could pick that up and specify the right parameter to the Selenium execution. And in that way, you get those 3 or 4 different things run concurrently. The reason it's called matrix is that you can go into higher dimensions. So if this is one axis, right, you have the choice of browser that comes from 3 different options. If you have a different axis, let's say if you're testing the application with different database, then that might come in as a second axis. And now you have this 2-dimensional test matrix that the Hudson would complete. And you can go even higher dimension in that fashion. So the benefit of the Selenium grid plugin in Hudson is that there really is no system administration overhead for setting up Selenium RCs. Normally, otherwise, it's kind of tedious that you have to make sure that the RCs start every time the machine comes up, and they have to be seeded with proper configuration to talk back to the Selenium hubs. And you have to do it in all kinds of different operating systems, which is not a rocket science, but it's just tedious. And so by using this as a Hudson plugin, you automate all these things, and you don't have to do anything, which is a really nice. And then also, this allows you to reuse the Hudson cluster that you might have set up as a Selenium grid cluster. So you sort of, with a very little additional effort, you get a lot more convenience out of it. So now one of the challenges of doing the Selenium test inside Hudson or the Hudson-like environment is that these all are the headless environment, as we call it. That is, they don't have GUI. and various operating systems, well, I should say that the browser, on the other hand, are expecting some GUI environment to run in. So to make the browsers work in an environment where you don't have a GUI is often a bit tricky. So so this is one of the challenges in running Selenium tests inside Hudson.